Is Resident Evil 4 Remake a good remake? Well, yes. Honestly, I was pretty skeptical about an RE4 remake at first. Even though the original Resident Evil 4 has been out for 18 years, it's still aged pretty well. So for the first time, remaking a Resident Evil game seemed a bit questionable, since it easily could have been done just to make a quick buck. But damn was I wrong. This game is phenomenal. It probably has the best combat in any Resident Evil game, and along with the revamped gameplay, also came an overall more solid boss lineup. And after 2 playthroughs, I feel confident enough in my opinion to give them a proper ranking from worst to best. Now before we begin the ranking, I have to mention something. I do not consider Dr. Salvador or the Garradors to be boss fights. In the past, when seeing people rank the original game's bosses, people tend to lump these guys in with the rest of them, and I'm sorry, but to me they don't qualify as bosses, they're just really tanky enemies. Also, many of my viewers are probably finding the fact that I made this a bit jarring. Long story short, my channel will continue to be mostly focused on the FromSoft games, but I'd like to branch out every now and then since I love a lot of games, like Resident Evil. Now, with that out of the way, here's my ranking of the Resident Evil 4 remake bosses from worst to best. Number 9, Del Lago. Now before criticizing this boss, I've gotta say that I don't think any of this game's bosses are necessarily bad. It's a really solid lineup overall, and the bottom 2 are the only ones that I think are just okay. And Del Lago takes the bottom spot for me since it's just not a very mechanically engaging fight. The concept of an underwater monster is a cool idea and all, but at the end of the day, there's just not a whole lot to it. And despite me generally not loving the idea of quick time events, I think this fight was more engaging in the original RE4. Getting knocked out of the boat and having to frantically swim back at least added a bit of variation throughout the fight. But in this one, there's only one super easy QuickTime event that can happen if you don't hit it while it charges at you. Other than that, you occasionally move out of the way of objects, and spend about 90% of the time just chucking those damn harpoons at it. Seriously, for such a straightforward fight, this thing just has too much health. Even though you can't get knocked out, at least they did add a mechanic where the boat will break if it gets hit too many times. So you are at least incentivized to dodge the debris. But overall, while this fight doesn't have any glaring faults, I just think it's the least enjoyable one that this game has to offer. Number 8, Salazar. Talk about a fall from grace. Out of every boss in the game, this fight is the only one that's completely unrecognizable from its version in the original. Which is unfortunate since, in the original, Salazar was hands down the best fight. I've seen people argue that he isn't that great in the original, since by that point in the game, it's possible to use a rocket launcher against him, making the fight super short. But the rocket launcher is literally the game's one-shot machine. Any fight can be trivialized with it. And when fighting him properly, he has an obvious weak spot, which opens up his body for damage, a lunging attack down the middle, which you need to run away from, and some tentacles on the side, which you can quick dodge. It was really well put together. But then there's this version, and I mean, it's pretty funny when Leon shoots him at the beginning.
You have been bestowed with lore, Sadler.
You talk too much.
Failed.
You vulgar, utterly uncivilized.
But then he comes back, and he starts spouting random nonsense about how Leon is just a part of his scripts, and it just feels like a really bizarre dialogue choice to use to kick off this fight.
Kill me or release me, parasite. But do not waste my time with talk.
Anyway, when it comes to the fight itself, it's okay. He stays pretty mobile while frantically moving around the arena, and in the meantime you just get shots in on his body whenever it opens up, leading you to come in for a scripted stab every now and then. In terms of his attacks, he does have a deadly one-shotting bite, which is by far the hardest part of the fight, but other than that, if you just don't stop moving, you'll probably do fine. All he really does is spray his boiling liquids around, and like I said, as long as you just stay mobile, they're not really that hard to avoid. Overall, it's certainly not a terribly put together boss, but there's just not a whole lot to praise about it. Except for the music, which is surprisingly good actually, but other than that, this fight is pretty forgettable. Number 7, El Gigante. From this point on, all of the remaining bosses are really solid, like at least B tier. El Gigante isn't the most challenging foe in the game, but it's just pretty well put together. Most of his attacks consist of well-telegraphed slams, swipes, and charges, which can be avoided by strafing or going through his legs if you time it right. Honestly, one of the best tips for every boss in the game is just to always stay moving, since it allows you to have a head start for running, since the game doesn't have a dedicated dodge button. Anyway, once you do enough damage to him, it will start forcing his Plaga to sprout from his back, which acts as a weak spot. Once you hit it, he'll be stunned, allowing you to either take the opportunity to get more shots in, or jump on his back to go ham with your knife. Either way is very satisfying. Now, everything I just mentioned sums up the bread and butter of the fight. However, something that really elevates this one is all of the small things sprinkled on top. He has some moves where he'll tear down structures and throw them at you, but if you chuck a grenade at him, he'll just drop it and break it, which is really fun to pull off. And of course, if you helped the dog stuck in the bear trap earlier, he'll come back and help you fight him. And he even causes the giant to break the cliffside, causing a huge pile of rocks to leave him in a down state where you can get some shots in. At the end of the day, El Gigante isn't a super complex fight, but it's a really fun boss to take down, combined with just enough fun details thrown in the mix to make it a really solid and enjoyable battle. Number 6, Sadler. While Sadler isn't the best fight in the game, it's definitely one of the most improved over the original. In the original game, he was a pretty underwhelming final boss. Despite replaying it a few days before the remake released, I can barely even remember any distinct attacks he had. Just shoot the weak spots and don't stand too close or you may get hit with a random tentacle, I guess. Also, his design was pretty underwhelming and not very cool.
Wow, that was weird.
But unlike the Salazar fight where they just completely overhauled it, here they decided to keep a similar idea for his design, but just make it look a lot better, and it works. Now, when it comes to the fight itself, it's decent. His attacks aren't anything crazy, but he has a decent bit of variety. He's got some melee swipes with dodge prompts, some projectiles, and also just some basic melee swings which you have to avoid normally. He also does call in the annoying bug enemies, but luckily they don't do a whole lot as long as you shoot the ones close to you every now and then. And on your end, your goal is just to hit the obvious weak spots, being the eyes all over him. And since this is the final boss in the game, popping them is pretty fun since you basically just get to unload your entire stockpile of ammo on him. No need to conserve anymore, just unleash all of your most powerful stuff. However, the main reason this fight works is because it feels properly climactic, which leads me to phase 2. Once again, this part isn't mechanically super engaging or anything, but it's a pretty cool spectacle nonetheless. Then of course, because it's a Resident Evil game, someone tosses you a rocket launcher to deal the final blow. While I could see some people arguing that this fight is a bit underwhelming since it's the final boss, I think it's worth recognition since while it isn't mechanically the craziest fight, it still feels appropriately epic and climactic. Which I have to give it props for, especially since I've seen a version of this game with a truly underwhelming final bout. Number 5, Chief Mendez. Throughout the first third of the game, Mendez is really effective at being an intimidating figure. You literally get your ass beaten by him twice, and then chased down by him alongside a bunch of ganados, leading to your final fight with him, which works as the finale to the village portion of the game. Then you attempt to blow him up, and he turns into, well, this. I mean, geez, the man was already 6'8", and now he's really gotta grow even taller? Well, at least his fight is awesome. His first phase is one of my favorites in the game. He's got a bunch of different attacks that are either well telegraphed, give you dodge prompts, or are parryable, and dealing with them is a lot of fun. I'd recommend getting on the second floor as quickly as possible as it gives you some more distance from him and allows you to parry. His second phase, while admittedly not as strong as the first, is still pretty good. Now that he's lost his legs, he uses his weird claws to hang from the ceiling and chuck shit at you, while occasionally getting close for some melee attacks. When he throws the flaming boards, it is kind of hit and miss. If you simply jog out of the way as he throws them, they're pretty easy to avoid, but if you aren't prepared, then they're almost guaranteed to hit you. Needless to say, you really should spend most of this phase on the second floor. And every once in a while, he throws flaming barrels at you, which you can shoot while they're still in his hands, which is really fun to pull off. I've heard some people argue that they don't like this fight much since you don't have a ton of space to move in the second half, but I personally never really found that to be an issue. And all in all, I just think Mendez is a really fun fight, leaving him directly in the middle of my list. Number 4 is the Krauser knife fight. This fight was probably the most unexpected change the remake brought to the table. I still think the cutscene / QuickTime event sequence from the original was pretty cool, but having it replaced with an actual boss fight was a great idea, especially since the knife plays a way bigger role in this game. I also like that the two Krauser fights were a lot more spread out in this game. Like, this one really just came out of nowhere. And when it comes to the fight itself, it's the most engaging one in the whole game. Since most of the game's enemies consist of slow, lumbering monsters, having to fight an actual skilled soldier who stays right on top of you the whole time is a welcome change of pace. Having to quickly parry his attacks and sneak in hits whenever you can is cool. It kinda feels like playing Sekiro on easy mode. Speaking of which, that's the main reason why this fight isn't higher. It's just a bit too easy. While parrying in this game is a lot of fun, and possibly my favorite change made from the original, the window you have to parry enemy attacks is pretty damn big. So that combined with the fact that the fight is kinda short leaves a little to be desired here. Keep in mind I played on standard difficulty, maybe this fight could be better if I played on professional, but still, stunning him to get kicks in along with some brief quick time events is cool as well, and all in all there's just never a dull moment here. So while I wish it lasted a bit longer, I still can't deny that for the short time it lasts, this fight is some of the most fun the game has to offer. Number 3, Verdugo. And now we go from one of the most changed fights to easily one of the most similar to its original version. And in both the original and the remake, I think Verdugo is one of the most memorable encounters in the game. In terms of fear factor, the build-up as you're being hunted down by some sprinting entity above you is really effective. If I hadn't played the original before, the part where he finally pops out would have probably scared the shit out of me. Luckily, his weakness is the same as it was in the original. Use the liquid nitrogen showers to freeze him up and get some shots in on him. I will say the one thing I don't love about it is that in this version, it can be a bit annoying trying to time the nitrogen dispensers. That could be seen as a good thing, and in retrospect using flashbangs on him may have been a smart idea, but overall it's not too hard. Plus, you can use each dispenser as many times as you want in this version, which allows you to retry if you mess up. Overall, the main thing this fight nails is just the intensity factor. Even when he goes back up to give you small breaks, you still have to watch for his tail swings every now and then, and even so, the quote-unquote breaks that he gives you don't last very long. Also, if you want, you have the choice to simply wait it out for the elevator and skip the fight altogether, which I wouldn't hate on anyone for doing, as it allows you to save some ammo, but personally, I never would as I just find the whole fight to be really cool. Plus, he drops an expensive item for you, and I just love the satisfaction of seeing him finally pop. So when it comes to gimmick fights, this is definitely one of the most clean and fun ones I've seen in a while. Number 2, Gigante Duo. For all my Elden Ring fans, praise the Lord because this game actually has a well-designed gank fight. So how did this game manage to pull off a fair encounter with multiple bosses? Well, there's a few different reasons. First of all, the Gigante as an enemy is relatively slow, plus you get to fight alongside Luis, so you can both just distract one at a time. Since one of them is heavily armored, the game pretty much expects you to realize that you should go for the normal one first. And once you do kill the regular one, the game realizes that a 2-on-1 against the last giant would just be too easy, so Luis ditches you halfway through.
Sorry, keep our friend busy for me. Where do you think you're going?
Man, what a dick. Okay, just kidding. He actually comes back so you can bait the monster towards him so he can plant some dynamite on his back. And once you blow it up, he sprouts the plaga from his back, so now you can realistically kill him. Awesome. This fight is so well thought out, but just to put the cherry on top, there's also the lava trapdoor mechanic. In the original game, the trapdoor was a fun little addition. Since you had to fight them alone, it was basically just a nice way of getting rid of one of them immediately so that you can face the second one in a fair duel. And then it just becomes unusable. But now there's a lot more to it. Instead of just stupidly falling to their deaths, now they'll actually back off of the trapdoor if they see you try to use it, so if you want to utilize it, you'll have to do a bit more planning to set it up. If you want to, you could finish the whole fight without even using the trapdoor, but if a game shows me a fun gimmick, you know I'll be utilizing it. Now if you want to use it, you'll have to get them into their down state by shooting the plaga sprouting from their back, and manage to get them in that down state while on top of the trapdoor, and once you do that, it's all too easy. Managing to kill both of them using the trapdoor feels so awesome since you know you're saving a lot of ammo in the process. Overall, I think this fight is fantastic. It's a fairly designed encounter with multiple bosses that feels perfectly executed, with a bit of spice on top if you manage to use the environment to your advantage. But while this fight was super well done, it just can't quite compete with the number 1 spot. And at number 1, Krauser. While the initial knife fight with Krauser seemed to be a bit cut short, I can forgive that since, at the end of the day, it's really just a teaser for the final showdown. This fight is awesome. It starts with a decently paced build-up as he goes through multiple loops of trying to gun you down from a distance, and then coming in for a close-range battle with the same moveset as before, with a few new additions here and there. You also have to go through some heavily booby-trapped sections with turrets, bear traps, and tripwires, and eventually you get to fight him straight up, and once again, he shares a similar moveset to what he had in the mines. But it's a bit more tricky here since you have to be mindful of the tripwires. Once he's had enough, he transforms into his final form, leading into the final bout. And the last straight up fight with him is hands down the most fun combat in the game. Here he gets even more aggressive than he already was, and his attacks are a lot more threatening. Plus he now has big mutated hands which act as a shield, meaning you either have to wait until he's open or shoot at his legs if you want to hit him. And all the while he puts a lot of pressure on since, unlike in the preview fight, your knife isn't infinite here, meaning you either have to learn to dodge or try to finish the fight quickly before your knives run out and you can't parry, which is your most useful ability here. Overall, Krauser almost feels like he's in a different game than all the other bosses. There's never any awkward pauses or breaks while fighting him, it's just a fast-paced and fun brawl. Now, is this fight perfect? Not quite. Like I said, I think the initial knife fight against Krauser is the most engaging boss in the game because there's no bullshit there. It's just a straight up fight. And while this fight definitely has some higher highs, I'm not a huge fan of dealing with the trap sections in the middle. I mean, it isn't bad at all, but I prefer if that stuff went by a little bit faster so you can just get to the best parts. But at the end of the day, the changes made to this boss were phenomenal. In the original RE4, this fight was okay, but now it's probably one of the best bosses in the Resident Evil franchise. And without a doubt, he takes my spot as the best boss in the Resident Evil 4 remake. Man, I love talking about this game. I'm sorry for those of you who are disappointed to see a non-Souls video, but rest assured, I've got some good ideas for upcoming videos. This might be the only video I make on this game, but I might do one more if I'm feeling up to it, or if this video does better than expected. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the Resident Evil 4 remake and how much you like the bosses, or in what ways you might consider this remake to be a letdown. Personally, I think it's a generally better game than the original, but there were some things here and there that could have been done better. All I know is I'm having a lot of fun with it. Anyway, I guess that's it. See ya.